when I was praying about kind of what direction to take with you guys, what I felt in my heart was really to focus on connection, because there are a million and one different directions you could go with a marriage seminar, because marriage sometimes feels very complicated, and there are a lot of different factors, but connection is what really came to mind. And because I work with individuals. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist, so I work with individuals and with couples just kind of in my practice, but I've also been a pastor's wife for the past 5 years, so I've also worked with couples in the church and just seeing a lot of the themes that kind of come up over and over and over again. And being married myself for, it'll be 10 years this year, also personal experience of seeing the things that come up. And so I'm excited tonight to talk with you all about connection. Because what I see so often is troubles start to come when disconnection happens, and we don't always realize that it's disconnection. We think, oh, we're fighting all the time, or oh, we don't really care for each other as much as we used to. And so I want to talk tonight kind of how connection is the core of a lot of the things. And there's two parts of this. So I kind of want to give you an overview of what the different parts are, so that, because the first part tonight might feel a little on the heavier side, and so I want to give you hope that tomorrow where it's going to be a lot lighter, and the heaviness though is for a reason, because I really want us to dig deep and dig into the depths of things that really help and are important. And so I was going to open with prayer, but Pastor Peterson did that already, so we'll skip that. Were you by chance able to get the slideshow up? Yeah. Okay, you can go ahead and start that whenever you're ready. So, I want to start out, though, by kind of asking you guys, those of you who are bold, what do you think are the biggest challenges in marriage? This could be personal experience, what you hear from all your friends who vent about their marriages, what you see on TV, whatever. Yes. Communication. That's a big one. Did I see another hand somewhere? Yes. Yes, supporting each other and providing help. That is a really big one that I see a lot. Anyone else want to throw something out there? Yes, quality time. And so all of those can feel very, very different. Okay, we got communication, we got helping each other, we got quality time. A lot of those still come down to connection. Because the thing is, when we're struggling with communication, we're struggling to be connected. We're on two different pages, maybe on our own agendas, dealing with our own stuff, and that connection is often missing. When we're failing to help each other, it's often because there's already some level of disconnection there, and we're not paying attention to what our spouse needs. Or we're so caught up in our own world that we're missing it. Quality time helps a lot with connection. And that can be challenging when small kids are involved. So, absolutely. The next question I want to ask, and you can switch to the next slide. When are the moments, for those of you who are married, or even engaged, who've been in a relationship for a while, when are the moments you feel happiest and most satisfied in your relationship? Fair. Food helps a lot. Breakfast and dinner. And, lunch on the days you're together. Yeah. I like that. That feeling of accomplishment, purpose, of we did this together, and this might have been really hard and challenging, but we worked together and we did this thing. I love that. Anyone else? When do you feel most satisfied? Like, marriage is good. I understand that very well. The 2-year-old and the 4-year-old, it's like, whew, we can finally pay attention to each other for 2 minutes. Absolutely. And again, so many of those have to do with connection. And so, yes. Yes. Uh-huh. love that, and thank you for bringing that up. That fits with a lot of what I'm going to talk about a little bit later, but we often see conflict as this really awful thing, and it doesn't have to be. So much of it has to do with the repair process and being able to come back together and have that moment, and that can actually strengthen relationship because it deepens things, it creates roots. Don't want to spoil everything for later, but you're right on point. That's absolutely right. So you can go to the next slide. I want to kind of walk us through first God's design. Like, why is connection even important from a biblical perspective? Like, how does this fit into God's design? So I'm going to go through a few scriptures. The first one is Genesis chapter 2, verse 18. Then the Lord God said, "It is not good for the man to be alone. I will make him a helper suitable for him." Here, from the very beginning, the first marriage that there was in the Bible, God designed that for them to have each other, for there to be help one for another, to have each other's backs, but also not aloneness. And I think a lot of times when marriages aren't going well, there's that sense of aloneness even in the marriage. And so coming back to this connection, this togetherness, is how God intended marriage to be. Genesis chapter 2, verse 24. Therefore shall a man leave his father and his mother, and shall cleave unto his wife, and they shall be one flesh. God's design is for the husband and wife to prioritize each other, to be connected in unity together. And so often we struggle because there are so many other things pulling our attention away from each other, and we're not that one flesh connected that God designed. Ecclesiastes 4, verses 9 through 10. Two are better than one, because they have a good reward for their labor. For if they fall, the one will lift up his fellow. But woe to him that is alone when he falleth. Pop-up popped up on my screen. For he hath not another to help him up. The scripture is not specifically about marriage, but it's about relationships, togetherness, but it can be applied to marriage. When you have a marriage where you're lifting up each other, where you have each other's backs, where you know, man, even if I completely flub it and mess up, my husband he's gonna take care of me, he's gonna cover it. Or my wife, she's gonna, we might have to work through some repair, but she's gonna forgive me, she's gonna work through that process. I feel that security of knowing, like, we are there for each other, to have each other's backs, to help each other. And when we get off in our own selfishness of marriage is about me, getting my needs met, all about me, we're missing out on the beauty of, no, I'm here for my spouse. We are here for each other. We're here to help each other. And even when we fall, even if we mess up, even if we have a moment of failure, we're here to help each other. And then Psalm 133, verse 1. Behold, how good and how pleasant it is for brothers to dwell together in unity. This kind of goes back to that last question I asked. When do you feel happiest and most satisfied? It's when you're dwelling together in unity. That's when marriage feels good. You're in unity, you're on the same page, you're working on the same team. And so we see that God's design is togetherness, connection, unity. You can go to the next slide. So what I love to do in the work that I do as a psychologist is being able to tie Jesus and science together, because they often don't. Science, when in its purest form, doesn't contradict God. It just helps us to see, wow, like, this is really how God designed things. This is how it works. This is cool, because it often goes hand in hand with the Bible. And so what we see when we look at science and studies that have been done is that secure attachment, which is that feeling secure in that connection in your relationship, is super important. So there has been so many studies, and it started looking at infants. The first studies on attachments had to do with infants, and they would study the way that infants responded when their caregiver left and then came back. And was the infant disoriented? Were they angry? Were they wanting that reconciliation that reunited. Like, let's repair this. Like, how did the infants respond? And over time, research has shown that kids that have secure attachment tend to go on to be much more stable, much more successful in life because they have that sense of security. If someone has my back, if I mess up, if I don't know what I'm doing, I can go to my parent, I can go to my caregiver. They've got my back. I feel safe. But it wasn't until much more recently that attachment researchers started studying attachment in adults. And what they found is that in adulthood, marriage becomes that primary attachment bond. That happens when you have your one person that you can rely on, depend on, and know they have your back. But because of our own things that we go through in life, maybe some of us didn't have that secure attachment in childhood. We didn't feel like our parents had our back, or we weren't sure. Things were inconsistent. We were never sure. Or maybe we've had previous relationships where things were just really unsteady and felt shaky, and we had betrayals or different things. Or even in the present relationship, sometimes that security can get shaky or even sometimes completely devastated where don't feel like you have it. And this can happen on a grand scale. And I say this not to say that your relationship's doomed if you don't have secure attachment. No, this is something that can be built that's really important to recognize because you can work on it and build it. And I'm going to talk through some of that today. But even if you have a secure attachment, you get in an argument, something happens. It can be something as silly as, which this happens often actually. Driving is actually one of the biggest causes of arguments in marriage. I read that recently. I was like, I feel so validated. But it could be something as silly as you're driving and your spouse criticizes you of like, there's a red light. Were you going to stop or what? And you're like, yes, I was, and now I feel completely attacked. But in those moments, our brain is like, danger, 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 because this is supposed to be my secure person, and now all of a sudden I feel attacked by the person I'm supposed to have this really close bond with. And our brain reacts with the fight, flight, freeze response, which is how our brain responds when it sees that there's danger anywhere. You could be being chased by a dog with rabies and you're running for your life. Like, it's that same kind of response that happens when the security in our relationship suddenly feels threatened. And this explains why oftentimes our spouse can get under our skin so much more quickly than anybody else in the world. You could deal with things at work all day long and you're patient forever. And then as soon as you get home, your spouse says one critical thing and your blood pressure shoots through the roof and you're trying to control your emotions. It's a biological thing that happens because your spouse is your secure attachment person. And I say that, and you can go ahead and switch to the next slide. I say that because so often when we get defensive or reactive in arguments, we either feel really, really ashamed and feel like we're a terrible spouse of like, why did I do that? Like, I know I was overreacting. Why in the world did I respond the way that I did? And we beat ourselves up for it. Or we completely just blame it all on our spouse of like, why did they do that? They were terrible. My reaction is totally justified. And we don't realize that what's actually happening is a biological thing, that our stress hormones, our adrenaline, our cortisol, everything spikes, and it takes some time for that to come down. So even just recognizing that is really helpful, and I'll go into this a little bit more tomorrow, actually. But recognizing that's important because it's kind of a cheat code for getting through arguments or getting through these moments is one, it helps you not take it quite so personally when your spouse has that initial reaction. It's like, oh, wait, okay, this is their biology. Let me give it a second, let them cool off, and then we can work through the repair. And you can be a little kinder on yourself, too, and recognize, doesn't give an excuse to be ugly to your spouse, never. But if you have that quick, snippy response, like, okay, hold up, let me give myself a second to breathe, and then we can work through it. This isn't mean our relationship's over. This is a biological thing happening. So, when our connection feels unsafe, our heart rate increases, stress hormones rise, our ability to think rationally goes out the back door. Um, and that's biological too. When we feel threatened, the part of our brain that responds very, very quickly, it's designed by God to respond if you're walking and all of a sudden there's a snake in front of you, you jump back before you even have a time to think. It's that same part of your brain that responds when you feel endangered in your relationship. And so rational thinking goes out the window, you respond emotionally. That's why it's really important, again, I'll get into this more tomorrow, but to be able to give yourself and your spouse permission to take a pause so that all the biology can come back down and you can work through it. But this is why we often say things that we later regret. But learning how to recognize that this is what's happening allows us to say, wait, I recognize all of these body signals. I'm not going to think rationally right now. I'm going to keep my lips sealed and give myself a second to come down. But you can go to the next slide. The flip side of this is when we have that secure connection, when we know, even if we have a tiff, even if we have an argument, my spouse still has my back. We're still here for each other. We're supporting each other. It actually helps to regulate nervous system. It helps. So even if you are going through the most stressful season of your life, if you know your spouse is there for you and has your back, it provides so much of a buffer to all of that. And I'm going to teach you guys how to respond in a way that signals security so that you can be there for each other in this way. Because what you need and what your spouse needs, what you both need in the relationship, even in moments of conflict, are responses that signal, I'm here for you, I'm paying attention to you, I'm listening, and I'm going to respond and engage with you in a way that shows that I really care. And when that happens, connection is restored. Like my brother in the back said earlier, that repair, and it can feel really, really, really good. So I'm going to pause there for a second before we go to the next slide. The next one's a question, but I guess I want to pause and see if you guys have any questions at this point. Any burning questions? And if not, I'll pause a few times throughout. Yeah. Yeah, you're 2 steps ahead again. But no. This is really, really good question. Really good. And I would say yes. Recognizing that and saying, and you can have whatever name you want for it. If you want to say, hey, my fight and flight's kicking in, give me a second. I'm going to go to the bathroom and I'll be back in 5 minutes. That's helpful because then your spouse knows, oh, okay, like he's not just avoiding the conversation. He's not just blowing me off and dismissing me. He's recognizing, give me a second, I need a second to regulate, and I'm going to come back. That is beautiful. That is exactly what we're aiming for. Yeah. There's a lot of different ways you could communicate that, but you can keep it super short and sweet. And it's also helpful to kind of talk about it ahead of time so that you both are on the same page and know that you're both going to do it. And that helps too. Yeah. Thank you. Any other questions? Not, I have a question for you guys. You can go to the next slide. What are some things that your spouse or your fiance or relationship partner, what do they do that help you feel connected or secure? And this can look very, very different from couple to couple. But are there any specific things that you're like, yes, this is what helps me, even in those moments of conflict, or maybe when we're not having conflict, these are the things that help me feel secure and connected? Yeah. love that because that's a couple of different things are happening there. One is you're showing each other that you prioritize each other by, like, you know what, everything else on my calendar, I don't know if you could all hear what she said, but about syncing calendars and seeing, being really intentional about prioritizing time together and those on a regular basis. And I love that because it's one, you're showing your spouse you prioritize them. Like they're as important, if not, they're more important than everything else on the calendar. And you're being very intentional about creating that together time on a regular basis, which is needed. Yeah. Anybody else? This is a chance to kind of brag on your spouse a little bit too, if you want, get some brownie points. Yes. Yeah. Yeah, no, that I'm sure helps with the repair process where you both feel seen and cared for. Like, okay, like she really cares about me. This is great. Cares about me in the times of conflict and cares about me in the times where things are going good or maybe you're just really mundane and paying attention to the details. I love that. Yeah. Yes. Yes. I love that. And it's because I think a lot of times, especially for those who are in ministry or even just working two different jobs, or even if you have kids and you're both people who are doing similar tasks side by side, we think that that automatically creates connection, but it doesn't. It can often create a lot of disconnection. But when you're intentional about coming together, debriefing, supporting each other through it, sharing schedules, making time, like those are the things that create connection. And it's a lot of intentionality. So thank you for sharing. Yeah. All right, so we can move on to the next slide. So I think I've hinted at this a little bit, but I really want to harp on this. Conflict is not the main problem in marriages. That may not feel true when you're in the middle of a conflict, but that's not the main problem. And I don't even want to say that we're necessarily doing conflict management, which kind of is what we're going to be working on, but I like to really focus heavy on the connection piece because conflict itself isn't a problem. Healthy marriages, the healthiest ones in the world, have conflict. It's a lot of it has to do with how is the conflict happening and is there repair happening afterwards. Because conflict itself, it's helpful when we start to view it as a good thing. And that can be like, whoa, like what? Our arguments are a good thing. But what conflict is it signals our connection's a little shaky. Or there feels like there's a threat there to the connection. That there's unmet needs. One of us is not having their needs met in the relationship. Or there's a fear of loss and rejection. And that may not always be at the forefront of our brains during a conflict. It's more so like, you scheduled this thing during our date day? What? We get very focused on the content and we miss the underlying stuff. But when we recognize, wait, no, conflict is a signal, then we're able to get down to the roots things. Because conflict communicates something needs to be addressed. Conflict itself is not the problem. It's, okay, what needs to be addressed that's underlying the conflict? And so you can switch to the next slide. oftentimes, again, we focus on the surface needs. Like, okay, we're always arguing about finances. We can't seem to get on the same page about money. Money is the issue. If we could just resolve the money issue, our marriage would be great. Or it's chores. One person feels like they're doing all the household chores and the other person does nothing. Like, there's a million and one different surface issues that couples argue about. And what I see when I've done marriage counseling with people is this is usually what they come into counseling. We want to resolve this issue about this. And I can see as they're talking, okay, this is not the core issue. This is what's manifesting. This is what's on the surface. But the core issues underneath are, do I matter to you? Are you paying attention to what I really need, to what I'm saying? Am I safe with you? Are you going to protect me? Are you going to, do you value our relationship enough to safeguard it? Or are you going to show up for me? If I'm having a bad day or a bad moment or I am not at my best, are you still going to show up for me and be there? These are more of the core needs that underlie the arguments and the conflict that are happening. And these are the needs that really need to be addressed. So I am not going to necessarily, I'm only going to open this up. You can switch to the next slide. This question for people who feel comfortable enough sharing, this is more for you to work through. So if your spouse or fiance or whoever is here, you guys can kind of talk through this together for a moment. Try to pick a not super big conflict because I don't want to cause any problems going home tonight. Try to find something that's maybe, a light conflict. We got an argument about driving on the way here. But see if you guys can find a conflict and figure out what was the core need underneath. So I'll give you all a few minutes to talk through this together, and then we'll come back. And if any of you get really, really stuck, you can raise your hand and I'll come over to you guys individually and see if I can maybe briefly help you figure out what the core need was. Sister in the AV booth, if you could go back to the last slide, that might actually help too with just kind of being a reference. Thank you. I'll give y'all about one more minute and then we'll keep going. could start closing up the conversation. For those who maybe are in the middle of a conversation, you can resume later if it feels safe. um, but I'm not going to ask you to share any of the details of anything. But could I get a show of hands first for those who found this kind of challenging? Yeah. Okay. Was anyone surprised by what you discovered? Or, yeah. Because sometimes and every couple's in a different place. Some couples talk through these things all the time. Other people get really stuck in those surface needs. But the reason I'm having you practice is because this is the direction I'm hoping to help you start thinking through if you haven't already. Because it helps so much with that connectedness. When you're able to get down to what the core issue is and what the core need is, then you're able to have the real conversation that needs to be had. You're able to have that sense of connectedness. Even if you're still having a really hard conversation, you're now starting to see each other's hearts and see what really matters. And then you can respond to what really matters. And that makes a world of a difference. Okay. So you can jump down 2 slides now. So think that this message has kind of already come across, but I want to reiterate it again. The major threat to marriages is disconnection. And what I mean by disconnection is it could be time and space, not spending enough time together, or you could be spending all the time together in the world, but you're missing each other emotionally, missing each other in what you need. And the ability to repair secure connection after conflict or withdrawal, and this is based on research, is a large predictor of marital success. So marital success is not how often you have conflict. It's your ability to repair that secure connection afterwards. And to be able to be connected with each other just on a regular basis in between, even just emotionally, being there, being attuned, being on the same page, even if you feel 2 completely different ways. You don't have to necessarily agree on the surface issue, but are you there for each other in the process of working through those surface issues? And what I see, and taking this back to the biblical side of things, marriage is ordained by God. Marriage is important. It's valuable. It is God's design. And so what does the enemy do to things that are God's design? He tries to destroy them. He tries to break them apart. And I see in marriages that it happens often gradually. Oftentimes sometimes it is like a sudden thing that happens that shakes trust and crumbles a relationship. But oftentimes the disconnection happens so subtly and gradually, and the enemy does this because then we don't even really recognize when it's happening. But it can happen through just not being emotionally present. It can happen through resentments that build over time, and often over those surface issues, and the core issues are never being talked about. It creates resentment. And then over time, emotional withdrawal. And sometimes this happens even because of good things. I'll use myself as an example. I have a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old. And that transition from being married, we were married for 5 years and then had our first kid. It totally flipped things upside down. We had to completely refigure out how to connect, how to make that work when now kids are in the picture. And what I see happen a lot is even with the kids piece, and I see there's a lot of people here with young kids or in the process of it, this is helpful to a degree, but we tell ourselves it's a season. This season will pass. It's a season where things are really challenging and really difficult, and we're feeling disconnected because we have kids. Or it could be just started a new career, or it could be whatever. And we tell ourselves it's just a season, which can feel somewhat helpful because it's like, okay, there's some normalcy to this. But what's not helpful is oftentimes we then say, it'll pass. And we don't put any intentionality or effort or work into trying to maintain that connection and figure it out. And so what I want to encourage everyone is even if you're in a season where it's very understandable that there is some disconnection there, it's still really, really, really important to work towards, even if it doesn't look the same as before, work towards how can we show up for each other and be here for each other in this season, because that very much is a spiritual warfare against the enemy, and that he's trying to create disconnection. And we're like, no, we are going to fight to maintain this connection no matter what the cost. And your spouse is not the enemy. The cycle of disconnection is. So, we're going to start transitioning to the next half of today, but before that, I have this big giant word on screen called curiosity. The reason I put this up there is because oftentimes when we're stuck in a cycle, especially if it's a cycle of disconnection or a cycle of conflict, our emotions are very much involved. And when our emotions are very much involved, it can be hard to take a step back and be like, I want to actually understand what's happening. And what I want to encourage everyone, put on your curiosity caps. As we go through this next section, I'm really going to talk about different cycles that we can get hooked into in our relationships. And if we can, and this is easier said than done, but if we can take a step back and tap into a sense of curiosity of, I wonder if any of these might show up. Even if you have a really, really great relationship, all of us fall into these patterns from time to time. But a sense of curiosity of like, I wonder if any of this could be happening. And if so, what could I do about it? It takes some of the sting, I guess, out of it, of we all get into this. Let's put on some curiosity and try to figure this out, because this is going to help my relationship. This is going to help my marriage. And none of this has to be a threat, because when we perceive it as a threat, what happens? Our blood pressure goes up, our heart rate increases, we stop thinking logically. Curiosity. And so we can go on to the next part. I did not coin this phrase. It actually came from a book that I'm going to recommend, which is also called Created for Connection. A really, really good book. It's written from a Christian perspective. At the end of everything tomorrow, I'll have a slide with the different books I recommend up there, and if you guys want to take a picture or anything. But it's called The Demon Dialogues, and I kept that phrase because I really, really like it, and it kind of highlights how the enemy can get into this with these patterns of disconnection that we can get into. But there's also there's a Bible verse and a quote here that I really, really like. The first one is an Irish proverb, and it says, "Strife is better than loneliness." And when I read that, I was like, wow, that's so true. Oftentimes, when we're having conflict, we're feeling lonely. We may not be the typical sense of I'm all by myself and I don't have someone, but it's in this issue, I don't feel like my spouse has my back. I feel lonely. Or we haven't connected in a while. I feel lonely. And that's where strife often comes from. Because you know what? I'd rather be connected in the sense of strife than to be completely all alone. But again, strife doesn't have to stay strife. It could be something we learned from and figure out how to better support each other. The next one is James 3, verse 5. And it says, "The tongue is a small part of the body, but it makes great boasts. Consider what a great forest is set on fire by a small spark." And how true is this in our marriages? But also, God gave us our tongues, and when used appropriately, it can also create a lot of healing and a lot of repair. So, what we're about to get into are some different patterns that can show up and happen that signal or can create this connection. Tomorrow, again, giving y'all hope, because today we're going to go through these, we're going to talk through these, try to figure out if some of these might be showing up and how to identify them. Tomorrow, we're really going to get into, okay, if these are happening, if I notice myself getting into this, how do we do the repair piece? How do we have connection on a regular basis? So, the first one, you can go to the next slide. It's called Find the Bad Guy. This is where something happens that causes one spouse to feel hurt, vulnerable, out of control, and that spouse then reacts angrily, attacking the other person. It could be like, it could be something simple like, babe, were you gonna make dinner tonight? And she's like, what do you mean am I gonna make dinner? You never fend for yourself. You always make me do everything. And he's like, what? I worked all day. And then it just turns into this whole back and forth spat where both people are attacking each other and missing the core issues. But it creates this cycle to find the bad guy. And again, this has been present since the very beginning. Adam was kind of guilty of this. When God approached him and was like, hey, Adam, did you do this thing? He's like, it was her. It was that wife you gave me. She didn't point finger back at him, but she pointed her finger at the snake. And, if the snake wasn't there, it probably would have been back at him. And this has been a problem since day one. But, again, this happens when we have that initial feeling threatened. Our emotions and everything go sky high. But it happens for both spouses at the same time, and they both respond by attacking. And in this situation, I'll give you a kind of a cheat code, but we'll get into this more tomorrow. If you find that this happens often in your relationship, or maybe just occasionally, but it's enough to be really uncomfortable, the key is to recognize that neither one of you is the bad guy. Your spouse is not the enemy. But this pattern is the bad guy. It's the demon dialogue. This pattern is what needs to be addressed, and we will work on that more tomorrow. But I want to highlight these because being able to identify your patterns helps you not make your spouse the bad guy. It helps you both be able to work together on, no, this is our problem. Our problem is not each other. Our problem is this, which then helps you be able to work through the repair. The second one, the next slide. Called the Protest Polka. Again, I did not come up with this name. This is from Sue Johnson. But I like it because it highlights the idea of this kind of being this dance that happens. So this is where one spouse reaches out. It could be a very similar situation of like, hey, like, are you going to make dinner tonight? It's like 8 o'clock. I'm kind of hungry. I worked all day. What happened? But instead of attacking back, the other spouse withdraws and just kind of shuts down and goes in the room and watches TV the rest of the night instead because they felt criticized, but they're like, I don't want to cause an argument. I'm just going to go withdraw. And now the other person's like, I feel even more disconnected. I reached out and now you left me and abandoned me. And now there's silence and coldness the rest of the night. And this pattern tends to repeat and repeat and repeat. And in relationships, there's what's often called a distancer pursuer thing that happens, where one partner, when they are upset, they tend to want space. They need time to process. They're an internal processor. I need to deal with my emotions by myself. I need space. But then the other person, when they're upset, they're like, I want to talk. I want to talk it through. I want to deal with this right now. We are not going to put this off until never. Like, we're going to deal with this now. And so the person who likes to talk about things tries to always resolve things right away. But what does that do for the person who needs space? It makes them run even faster. That's often what's happening here. Is each person processes stress differently, but it creates this cycle of disconnection, and it tends to spiral worse and worse over time. This one is really, really common. Happens a lot. So if you're noticing this in your relationship, no need to panic. It can be worked on. And again, this helps you both be able to say, hey, this is our issue. It's not you. It's not me. This is the problem. We need to work on this. And the key to this one, the brief key, is to be able to name it for what it is. Hey, we're doing that polka dance thing again. Let's talk about it. What is actually happening? And learning to be vulnerable. Like, hey, no, I actually need space because I felt attacked and, I just need some space to process. And the other person being like, okay, I get that, but I actually feel really lonely when you go withdraw into the room for the rest of the night, and that doesn't feel good. Like, okay, now you're talking about some of these underlying core things that helps come out of this. third one, this is the last one of the three. This is called freeze and flee. You can go to the next slide. So this one often stems when the protest polka is going on for a long time and just isn't working. Sometimes the pursuing spouse gives up. They're like, I've had enough of this. I'm tired of reaching out. I'm tired of expressing my needs. And they just start withdrawing too. So they go silent when they're upset, maybe feel numb. It's not so much their normal way of being, but in this relationship, they're like, I've tried so much and I'm tired of it. And so when this happens, usually conflict, which is not the issue, but conflict stops because now both people are withdrawing. And the problem is, though, there's now no emotional connection either. And over time, reaching out to each other and having those vulnerable conversations feels more and more risky because that distance has gotten bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger until the connection's gone, and now you just kind of feel like strangers in the same house. And sometimes, again, sometimes the spouse can be putting their energy into something positive. It could be work. They're like, okay, you know what? I'm going to throw all my energy into work, and I'm going to provide for my family by working all the time, but there's no connection. It could be ministry. You could be the greatest thing in the world. I'm going to throw myself into ministry, but there's no connection. And this can often lead to depression in one or both people too, when over time, that person that you're supposed to have a secure attachment with has become so disconnected. And oftentimes there is shame present, this belief of something must be really wrong with me. I can't make this marriage work. Something's wrong with me. And that shame makes you want to hide and withdraw and freeze. And so in this situation, what's required is partners have to learn how to respond and engage with each other again. Slowly over time, but learning how to say, hey, you know what? I really miss our conversations we used to have. Or, hey, you know, I actually feel really lonely, and I would enjoy having dinner together tonight. Like making those small bits of connection again, and it helps when both partners are on the same page. If we're both willing to do this work, we want to reignite this, restart this connection. It is possible, and it can be done, but it does take intentionality. And again, your spouse is not the issue or the enemy. It's this cycle and this pattern that we can often get into. So I'm going to pause here because I'm about to go into some questions. And again, these questions are not for you to answer to me. These are going to be for you both to work on together. Or if you're here by yourself and your spouse isn't here tonight, even just kind of working through this yourself or taking a picture to talk through later. But I want to pause and see if you all have any questions before we get into that. I know it's a lot of information, so I like to give space to absorb and ask. Yes. Yes. Yes, that's a great question. And that is, and if you want to go back to the protest polka slide so everyone can kind of see, that's a great question. And it usually is a fight, flight, and freeze response that's happening. So for the spouse who wants to distance, there's often a flee response that's happening. Like, I need space, I need distance. For the one who's wanting that connection immediately, there's usually a fight response of like, no, I need this now, I'm going to fight for it. And so usually both spouses are having their own kind of stress response happening in that moment, but they're different and the needs are different. So yes, absolutely. Being able to name that of like, hey, I noticed my fight response coming in. This is what I'm needing, but I also recognize you're having your own stress response. Like even being able to recognize that in your spouse, like I recognize you're having your own. And we'll go into more detail tomorrow of how to actually do this because it can be hard, but it's 100% doable. But how do you talk through this? To say, hey, like, you know what? I really, really need to connect. I don't want this issue to go unresolved. I don't want you to withdraw, and then we never deal with the core underlying issue. But I recognize you're not going to be able to think clearly or communicate clearly right now because your flee response is on board. So you know what? Let's take 20 minutes. I'll give you some space, but can we please come back and talk about this afterwards so that both people's needs are getting met? And what you're learning how to do in that process is you're learning how to attune to each other's emotions and needs. So it's not all about you, even if you can't think straight because your own stress response is happening. It's like, no, you know what? I care about the other person too. They're not the enemy. It's the cycle that's the enemy. We're going to work through this, and we're going to figure out how to do this together. And that learning how to do it together is what helps breed that connection and repair. Yeah. Did that answer your question? Yeah, thanks. Any other questions? Okay. So, you can go back to the purple slide, the first one. So, what I'm going to take you all through is a series of questions to help identify patterns that may show up in whenever you have conflict, or notice that there's just disconnection. Maybe there's not conflict that's big and loud and blaring, but it's just like we're feeling really distant, and I don't like that. To be able to identify the patterns, and the reason is if we can identify the patterns, then we have something to work on together. You're not the issue, I'm not the issue, pattern is the issue, and we can work on this together. So, the first statement, you can go to the next slide. And I'm hoping, I might have made that font on the bottom a little too small so I can read that. So, when blank happens, I do not feel safely connected to you. And if y'all have something to write with, you can write these down. If you want to fill them in now, you can. If you feel like this is something you'd like to do later or on your own, you can do that too. But when blank happens, I do not feel safely connected to you. And the writing at the bottom, which may be too small to read, says, fill the blank in with the cue that starts the cycle of disconnection. So it could be when we're in the same room but scrolling on our phones instead of engaging, I do not feel safely connected to you. Or when I share something vulnerable and it's met with distraction or quick advice, I do not feel safely connected to you. Or when you insult me and refuse to apologize, I do not feel safely connected to you. So I'll give you all a moment to write this down. If something immediately comes to mind, you can fill it in. But this is to help identify some of these core underlying needs and these patterns that happen. I'll give you a few more moments. See, there's a couple people still writing. Okay. And then the next one, you can go to the next slide. I tend to blank. So this one is really learning how to take ownership for your own part in the pattern. Again, there's no need for shame in this. We all fall victim to these patterns from time to time. But learning how to take ownership of your own part in it is really, really important. That's going to help you be able to communicate in the moment. So I tend to blank. I move this way in our dance to try to cope with difficult feelings and try to protect myself. You could fill in the blank with something like, I tend to criticize, withdraw, go silent, protest, distract myself, over-explain, seek reassurance, etc. So I'll I'll give you a moment to identify your tendency in these patterns. I'll give you just a couple more moments. And if with any of these, like you have like a question or it feels confusing, you can raise your hand and ask. So I want it to be helpful. Okay. So the next one, you can go to the next slide. This has to do with some of those dances. So if you notice, there's a dance that you get into. So the more I blank, the more you blank, and then the more I blank, and round we go. So this is kind of coming together, and you can talk through this together or do it on your own, whatever feels safer or more helpful. See if you can identify the pattern that happens between the two of you. I'll give you just a couple more moments for this one. Okay. So the next one, and you go to the next. Oh, you already did. What I then say to myself about our relationship is blank. So this again requires a little bit of honesty and vulnerability, but honesty and vulnerability are required for these hard conversations to get down to the core concerns and the core needs. So what I then say to myself about our relationship is blank. So summarize the most catastrophic conclusion you can imagine. You're like, why in the world would you want me to do that? Because usually this is what our emotions are saying in the moment. We might not be actually thinking it, but our emotional reactions in the moment are usually linked to whatever the most catastrophic conclusion to this statement is. So it could be, what I then say to myself about our relationship is, I don't matter to you, or you'd rather be with someone else, or I will never be good enough for you, etc. And again, we all have intense thoughts that come into our minds in moments when our secure relationship feels threatened. That's when we tend to have those. I'll give you just a couple more moments. All right. Now we can go to the next one. So, this is the glimmer of hope at the end of this. So, this is a series of conversations to help you work through the pattern so that you can have this conversation. Maybe we can warn each other when this dance begins. We can call it blank. Seeing this dance is our first step out of the cycle of disconnection. So this is where you get to be creative with your spouse or your fiance. Um, you get to call it whatever you want. You can call it the protest polka if you want. If you want to come up with your own name, like, I don't know, something silly, pineapple cupcakes or something. I don't know. Like, some people find it nice to have something super lighthearted and silly to call it because it helps kind of break the tension in the moment. Some people are like, that's ridiculous. Like, just call it what it is. But this is where I'd like you and your spouse, if you'd like to do this together, come up with a name for this pattern. Whatever pattern it is you know you get into. Even if you don't get into it often, even if it's just once every 6 months. Like, we all get into patterns at least once every 6 months. See if you can come up with a name for it so that you can then stop pointing fingers at each other and say, hey, this is what's happening, because now we can work with this. So, would anyone, again, no one's pressured to share, but would anyone like to share what this process was like for you? Not your specific answers, but what was this process like for you to kind of go through these questions and name it? Awesome, awesome, very, very good. And that's part of the reason I'm having y'all do the exercises, is because being able to put it into words, like, makes such a big difference. Like, feeling it emotionally is one thing, and that can feel so overwhelming. Being able to put it into words and seeing it as something outside of yourself, of like, it's this external thing that's happening, makes it so much easier to work on. So, awesome. Would anyone else like to share your experience? You definitely. Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for sharing that. Because a lot of times it's the subtle nature of it that makes it so hard to name, because it happens so gradually and over time. And it's like, if you don't realize this is a pattern and that this is something that, people go through and deal with, but it's so easy to either blame yourself or blame your spouse. And that's when things get dangerous. Because then you're like, maybe I would be better somewhere else, or better ending this, or better whatever. It's like, no, these are patterns that we get into as humans. We're all humans. We all have biology. Our bodies react when we feel threatened. Like, that's a human response that happens to everyone. How we respond when we feel threatened often depends on our temperament, like our personality, how we were raised, um, a lot of different things. We all respond differently when we feel threatened, but we all have that response. And then we get into these patterns. And when they happen subtly and over time, especially when it's more of the withdrawal one, we start to feel it maybe like we're just not meant for each other, we're not made for this, whatever. It's no. It's just this is sneaky and it sneaks up on us. And it's if both of our pattern when we feel threatened is to withdraw, okay, how do we start naming that? How do we start working on that of like pushing ourselves to do what's uncomfortable of, you know what, we're going to talk about this. Can we talk about it? Not criticize each other, not be ugly. Like, you're not the issue, I'm not the issue. It's this pattern. Can we start working on this together? Because we need connection. Connection is valuable. It's essential on a spiritual level. We are so much more powerful spiritually when we're connected with our spouse, when we are treating them with the love of Christ, when we're living out the fruit of the Spirit with each other. We're a whole lot more powerful spiritually. And it's just so much more satisfying. It helps us long term to be able to have the marriage, to have the family that we want. So when we can name this cycle and work on it and build that connection together. And so if you can go to the next slide. This is the first slide of tomorrow, but I want to again give you some hope. This is what we're focusing on for the first half of tomorrow, is from rupture to repair, reconnecting after conflict. So how do we actually do the work now that we've identified these patterns? Let's get into the details of how do we do this work to reconnect after conflict. And then the second half of tomorrow is going to be focused on the in-betweens when we're not in conflict. What do we do to create that connection then? Like, I love the shared schedule thing and the prioritizing dates, like that kind of stuff. How do we work through that to just maintain this closeness and connection and being there for each other? So that's all I have for you all tonight. But if there are any other questions or comments, I'd be happy to open the floor for that.